Welcome us back.
So we're back. It's Friday, and this is again Steve Autrey, and I'm still Paul Thompson.
And I'm going to read for us the very last two verses of the Sermon on the Mount. Now, we've been in the Sermon on the Mount quite a while.
I have a feeling the folks at Huntersville are going to breathe a deep sigh of relief and say, hallelujah.
Well, you know, many people, though, don't really explore the Sermon on the Mount because what it says is so challenging and so difficult. So thank you for hanging in there, because the Sermon on the Mount is absolutely crucial to what it means to live the Christian life and to have a Christian ethic.
I'll be honest, until we started really walking through this intentionally, I've never spent as much time on it, and it truly has been very convicting for me.
As it should be.
As it should be.
And for me as well. So here is how it wraps up, how Matthew finishes the Sermon on the Mount in Jesus' teachings. So Matthew 7, verse 28 and 29. Now when Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were astounded at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority and not as their scribes.
So I think it begs the question, one, Steve, let's talk for a moment about the authority by which Jesus taught. And now we sit there and we think, oh, of course Jesus had authority. He's the Son of God. He's Jesus. He's God in human flesh.
But in the first century, when Jesus, that's how we know Jesus through the view of 2,000 years. Mm-hmm. When Jesus comes upon his teaching and his ministry outing, he's basically an uncredentialed peasant.
He has no formal training that they certainly know about.
Yeah, he did no diploma to hang on the wall. By the way, I am the student of this, who was a student of this, who was a student of this. Therefore, what I'd say is authoritative.
And while Jesus is absolutely steeped, I think that's another important aspect. We have to remember Jesus would have been steeped in the Jewish traditions.
Oh, absolutely.
He would have been born, raised, completed. His life would have been centered as the young Jewish boys of his day in the Torah.
But he would have been regarded in the professional circles as a self-taught, self-proclaimed teacher. Mm-hmm. He didn't go through the proper channel, so to speak. So the people are astounded when they hear this regular guy from, supposedly a regular guy from the small town of Nazareth, who is a blue-collar worker for all practical purposes, stand up and teach in such an extraordinary manner.
He's not quoting other rabbis.
No.
He is not standing on the tradition of the elders. He's not referring to these extra-biblical books. Jesus is correctly interpreting how God wants these what we call Old Testament passages to be understood, and he is clarifying that this is indeed the way, the law that God wants us to understand it.
No doubt. And here's what's interesting, they recognize that as they are in his presence.
We've often had the conversation around authority. Authority is not something that we give, we recognize. I've used the illustration a number of times about Rod, who is our associate pastor. Rod started off here as a 10-hour-a-week youth person. Pretty soon, people realized that Rod had the experience. Rod had a lot of training. Rod had just this characteristics of, he quickly became a pastoral figure. And it took several years for us to actually get him into those positions to where he was formally adopted as the associate pastor. But he acted as one a long time ago. And our folks recognized it and certainly appreciated it and began to relate to him as a pastor. I sense that that's very much like the authority. These folks, they didn't vote Jesus as, we're going to vote him in as pastor. No, they recognized that he spoke with the authority of God. They recognized its truth.
Which is something, too, I want to challenge all of us on a little bit, is there is a supernatural element to the person of Jesus, that when he shows up on the scene, when he embarks on his ministry, there's something beyond explanation about what he brings. It's remarkable. It should be undeniable. He is a transformational figure in his person, who goes on to be the most transformational person in human history.
So Matthew has this wonderful quality about it that even in its structure of the book, it relates back to Moses and the Torah. As we often talked about Moses as the lawgiver, Jesus is the perfect example of the law. He lives, he embodies the law. So if you remember, there are 5 books of the Torah, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Matthew uses 5 statements like what Steve just read. And when he had finished saying these things, and that's a formula that that Matthew uses to end 5 sections within the book of Matthew, relating back.
Right, and so because part of what Matthew wants to convey is that Jesus is indeed the fulfillment of all things that have led the people of Israel to this moment. I mean, that's why you get the long genealogy in Matthew. It's so important for Matthew to say Jesus doesn't come out of nowhere. Jesus comes out of this deep, rich tradition of a set-apart people who were to represent God back to the world, who comes and then shows us how God is best represented back to the world.
And as we've said in this many times over the course of these sermons on Matthew, it is critical. We understand that the primary early readers of Matthew's gospel would have been Jewish.
So let's bring it home a little bit to where we are. What are we to give Jesus? What authority is Jesus then to have in our life?
Well, I think that question, hopefully we've answered over a number of weeks, but it boils down to simply this. It's not enough to show up one hour a week. It is not enough to offer our verbal assent that, yeah, we agree with whatever Jesus says. No. Does it work its way into our daily conversations? Does it work its way into the way that we live?
Yeah, one of the interesting pieces I find in John's gospel is the first miracle when Mary, his mother, asked him at the wedding at Cana to transform the water into wine, do something about this problem. And Jesus kind of blows her off a little bit, but then she ultimately looks at everybody else and goes, listen to him, do what he says.
Do what he says.
And I think so much of our Christian faith could be that, if you're going to memorize a verse, maybe that's the one. Do what he says. Yeah, listen to him. Do what he says. Whatever he tells you to do, do it.
Even if you're having doubts and fears, I think one of the points I tried to make at Easter, go on the way with Jesus. Even if you're not fully, not sure.
Let's put it this way: even if you don't want to love
him on the way,
if you don't want to treat people as you would be treated yourself, well, do it anyway. Get over it. If you don't want to forgive, well, guess what? You don't have an option because Jesus told you to do it. If you don't want to love everybody, well, don't take it up with me. Take it up with Jesus. He's the one who told you to do it.
Yeah, even if you don't agree with people who are staying United Methodist or leaving United Methodist, still love them. Still be in relationship with them. Still treat them with dignity and honor and respect.
That may look like the narrow way. Because often it is. And it may feel like there's no way this makes any sense, but Jesus tells you to do it anyway. And so we best be about doing it.
So we're, over the next couple of weeks at Huntersville, we're going to still explore a few more chapters, a few more sections of Matthew's Gospel that are unique to Matthew's Gospel that I think will, again, help us understand. There's one section on conflict in the church, and I'm particularly interested in that one coming up soon. But in the meantime, we close this chapter on the Sermon on the Mount. Thank you so much, as always, for your attention.
Yeah, and at Denver, we're going to be a little bit off schedule from you. We'll be finishing up the Sermon on the Mount in the 3rd week of May, and then the 4th week of May, we're having a combined service with our fellow brothers and sisters in the Denver community who are United Methodist out at the campground. So we'll be looking forward to that on May 28th. But for now, God bless you, and look forward to seeing you, I hope, this Sunday.
Thank you.